I never imagined that one evening could completely shatter the life I had built so carefully. Everything seemed perfect. Almost too perfect. The soft glow from the chandelier bathed the dining room in golden light. The table was beautifully set, crystal glasses, polished cutlery, and a warm, inviting aroma of roasted lamb filling the air. I sat there with a glass of red wine in my hand, surrounded by laughter that felt genuine. At least it was supposed to. For a brief moment, I let myself believe in that illusion, that I was part of a loving family, that the woman sitting across from me, my mother-in-law, truly cared for me, and that my husband still looked at me with love in his eyes. But sometimes, happiness is the cruelest disguise. As I lifted my glass, my eyes caught something, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement across the table. My mother-in-law leaned toward my husband and whispered something under her breath. Her lips barely moved, but I saw the way his expression changed, just slightly, almost like a shadow passing across his face. And then he nodded. Something inside me tightened. My glass. My trust. Everything around me seemed to twist in slow motion. That whisper, that glance. They were secrets meant to exclude me. It wasn't the first time they shared a secret smile or exchanged quiet words. But tonight it felt different. The air felt heavier. The silence between their laughter felt loaded. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was overthinking, but then I took a sip of my wine, and the moment the liquid touched my tongue, I froze. It was bitter. Wrong. Not just a bad flavor. Something else. My throat tightened just slightly. Not enough to panic, but enough to know something wasn't right. I placed the glass down slowly, trying not to draw attention. My heart began to pound, loud enough that I could almost hear it echoing in my ears. I looked around the table. Everyone was still talking, laughing, completely unaware. But she was watching me. My mother-in-law's eyes lingered for a split second too long, and then she looked away, pretending to be amused by something her husband said. That was it. That tiny, guilty flicker in her eyes. It told me more than any words ever could. Something was wrong with that drink, and she knew. My fingers tightened around the napkin in my lap. My instinct screamed to confront her right there, to throw the glass, to demand the truth. But another part of me, the calmer part, whispered, "Wait, don't act yet. Don't give her satisfaction," so I smiled. I nodded. I even laughed when someone cracked a joke, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was burning. Every second that passed, I could feel the tension building like a storm waiting to break. My mind raced. Why would she do this? Had I offended her somehow? Or was there something deeper? Something I didn't yet see? And what about my husband? Was he in on it? He was sitting right next to her, talking as if nothing had happened, as if this was just another happy family dinner. But the way he avoided looking directly at me, the way his laughter felt forced, it tore at me. I started watching, really watching, every movement, every gesture. Her hands, always perfectly manicured, were fidgeting with her ring. Her eyes darted toward me, then quickly back to her plate. She barely touched her own glass of wine. Instead, she kept glancing at mine. That's when it hit me. She hadn't poured her drink herself. She had poured mine. Earlier that evening, she had insisted on serving me. "You just relax, dear," she had said with that warm, motherly smile. "Let me take care of everything tonight." And I had let her. Now, as I stared at that same glass, the reflection of the candlelight flickering in the red liquid, I realized just how blind I had been. What was in it? Why did it taste so wrong? And why was she watching me like that? 1,000 questions flooded my mind. But there were no answers. Only silence. My throat felt tight, but not from the wine. It was the fear. The kind that grips you quietly. The kind that doesn't let you breathe. I forced myself to stay calm, to appear normal, because I knew that whatever this was, I couldn't show weakness. I turned slightly, pretending to adjust my napkin, and caught her reflection in the glass cabinet behind her. She was smiling faintly, but not the smile of a loving mother. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't. My stomach turned. That's when I realized this wasn't just about dislike or jealousy. This was personal. There was intent behind that smile, behind that whisper. Something was being planned, and I was the target. My mind replayed the last few weeks. The cold comments, the strange silences, the way she had been overly kind lately, offering help with everything, insisting we spend more time together. It all seemed so harmless then, but now it all looked like preparation, a plan, and suddenly I wasn't sure who I could trust. The man sitting beside me, the man I had loved and believed in, wouldn't even meet my eyes. His phone kept lighting up under the table. Each time he'd glance at it and quickly lock the screen again. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe that he wasn't part of this. But something deep inside whispered otherwise. The noise around me faded. The laughter, the music, everything blurred into the background. All I could hear was the echo of that whisper across the table, the bitter taste on my tongue, and the heavy beat of my own heart. I smiled again, a small, calculated smile. Because in that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't confront. I would observe. If this was a game they were playing, I would learn their rules, and when the time came, I would break every single one of them. That night, as the clock struck midnight and everyone started to leave, I quietly carried my untouched glass to the kitchen sink. I poured the rest of the wine down the drain, watching the deep red swirl away. It looked like blood, a silent warning of what was coming. I turned off the kitchen light, my reflection staring back at me from the window. My eyes looked different, colder, sharper. I whispered to myself, "This isn't over," because I knew then that whatever they had started tonight, I would finish. And when I did, they wouldn't even see it coming. After that night, I kept seeing our life in two halves, the before and the after. The before was tidy, polished, and believable. On paper, it was the kind of life people envy. A good job that paid well, friends who invited you to dinners, and a home that smelled like fresh coffee on Sunday mornings. I had worked for years to get there. I built a career that gave me pride. I showed up early, stayed late, and earned respect not by shouting, but by doing the work no one wanted to do. I thought hard work was proof enough, a shield against petty things like gossip or resentment. My marriage fit that picture too. We had a rhythm to our days. Morning coffee, busy commutes, evenings where we shared small stories about our day. We weren't perfect, who is? But we were comfortable, and comfort felt like safety. I trusted him. I trusted us. And I believed naively that the rest of the family saw me as part of that trust, not as an intruder. Appearances can be very convincing. Looking back now, the cracks were always there. Hairline fractures hidden beneath the gloss. My mother-in-law's coldness was one of them. At the time, I told myself stories to explain it away. She'd been through a lot. Maybe she was just reserved. People have their ways, I thought. I kept my distance where she kept hers. I smiled at her compliments, returned her polite calls, and let her be the elder with an opinion. But the small things, those tiny, barely noticeable moments, they added up. At first, I dismissed the missing emails as a glitch, blamed the spam folder, or told myself I'd been careless. When my husband made excuses to be busy at odd hours, I smiled and trusted him. When she lingered a little too long near his side at family gatherings, I rationalized it as familiarity, the closeness of in-laws. You get comfortable explaining away warning signs. It's easier than facing the possibility that your life might not be what you think. Slowly, like a camera pulling focus, those little moments sharpened into a pattern. A message deleted before I could read it. A calendar invite declined with a vague excuse. The way their conversations paused if I approached the room, only to continue as soon as I left. Once I reached for my husband's phone to show him something silly, and he tensed, just a flicker of unease. He smiled, said everything was fine, and slid the phone away. I let it go. I told myself trust mattered more than suspicion. My friends noticed nothing. They'd seen me at my desk, hear about my promotion, ask about travel plans, and congratulate me. They saw the outside of my life: dinners, laughter, the odd vacation photo. No one saw what was happening in the quiet spaces between texts. No one heard the low, private laughter exchanged across the table at my expense. No one smelled the bitterness in my wine. There were also the little slights that sting more than open cruelty. A passed-over compliment at a family event, a joke made at my expense, and then passed off as banter, a thinly veiled comparison between me and the woman my husband's family preferred. I remember one afternoon when my mother-in-law helped me with a home project. She stood behind me the whole time, correcting my grip, suggesting better ways to hold a hammer, then later told others, with a laugh, how clumsy I'd been. It was small, harmless to them, humiliating to me. Those incidents are easy to let slide when you're in love, when you're tied to memories and shared plans. You soften them with explanations. She doesn't mean it. He's just tired. It's not important. But tiny, unfair things build weight. They sift into the cracks of your confidence until you do not stand as tall as you used to. And then came the pattern I couldn't ignore. The way her eyes always found him when I wasn't looking. Not a kindness or a passing glance, but a deliberate study. A measuring of someone she clearly believed belonged to her in some way. Her attention had the shape of ownership. Watching it made a slow, cold panic rise in me, like reading an old contract for the first time and discovering there's a clause that gives someone else control over your life. Denial is protective. I clung to it for as long as I could. You hope for the best in people. You hope your husband would never choose to hurt you. You hope your in-laws would accept you as family. You hope, because hope is what keeps you from falling apart. But the truth, when it comes, is often merciless. It doesn't clear your doubts gently. It demolishes them. That night with the wine, the whisper, the bitter taste, it wasn't just one misstep. It was a reveal, a door that had been unlocked for a while, suddenly thrown wide open. After that, even ordinary memories looked suspect. The way my husband would smile at a text became something else. The half-time he had to work late looked different under a new light. The random visits from my mother-in-law, once framed as thoughtfulness, suddenly had the outline of planning. Every small action that once felt like normal family behavior now rearranged itself into evidence. I remember sitting at my kitchen table the next morning, drinking black coffee and watching sunlight spill across the newspaper, feeling like I was watching someone else's life. I replayed the last 6 months like a detective gone back through old footage, searching for clues I'd missed. The pieces started to fit together in a way I couldn't unsee. Anger was there, but it came later. At first, there was a current of cold clarity, the kind that makes your hands steady. Panic would destroy me. If I reacted wildly, it would give them the advantage. If I showed fear, they'd treat it as proof of my weakness. I'd already seen how they behaved when they thought they were above question. They smiled, they consoled, and they wrapped themselves in the safety of other people's assumptions. So I made a choice. I would not be a character in their script anymore. I refused to be passive. I would become the observer and the architect. I would gather facts instead of accusations. I would hold on to the composure I needed to see clearly. I started small. I made copies of emails that seemed odd. I started locking my phone when I left the room. I began taking mental notes of who said what and when. I listened for patterns, words repeated, excuses reused, timings that matched too perfectly. I learned to read the spaces between sentences, the silences that meant something. Curiosity replaced innocence. Wariness replaced carefree trust. I would not let them rewrite my future. In the weeks that followed, I became methodical. Not cruel, not theatrical, just attentive. I refused to let fear or panic lead me into mistakes. I could feel a strange, unfamiliar power growing in me. Information. Knowing is strength. A truth exposed is armor. If they thought they had already won, they were wrong. And so, with a steadying breath and a determination that surprised even me, I stepped onto a path I had never planned to take, one that would require patience, cunning, and an unshakable resolve to reclaim what they had quietly tried to steal. The nights after that dinner blurred into one long, taut line of waiting. I woke up thinking about the whisper, the bitter taste, The way my mother-in-law's smile had folded into something private and ugly. My days became a series of small, deliberate acts, scanning emails, watching faces, listening to laughter for the cracks that hid meaning. Every ordinary moment felt suspect. My husband's phone was the first thing I noticed. It was his little secret, a lifeline to something I couldn't see. He started keeping it face down, tucked away in pockets, buzzing with messages that he ignored when I was near. When he laughed at his mother's jokes, it wasn't the easy, warm sound I'd known. It was sharp, rehearsed, like a man performing a role. The ease between them made a hollow place in my chest. At first I tried to reason. Maybe they were simply close. Maybe I was projecting my fears. But the mind, once primed to notice, sees things it used to miss. I started to catch patterns. Quick whispers when I entered a room. A message glanced at and then closed when I came closer. A hand resting a beat too long on his sleeve. It was as if someone had been rehearsing a plan in the wings. And finally, the curtain had slipped. Then came the night I found the proof. I had been looking for a utility bill in the study. A mundane chore. Papers lay in neat stacks, a lifetime of household clutter. I sifted through envelopes and junk mail, half distracted, thinking of nothing and everything at once. That's when I felt it. The edge of a folded document, tucked beneath a stack of car insurance notices. I unfolded it without thinking, and the words hit me like a cold wind. An insurance policy. A policy naming someone else. My name was there, the policy number, the small print that makes the legal world turn. But what froze me was the beneficiary. Not me, not even my husband alone, but another name. Her name, my mother-in-law's name. My first reaction was disbelief. I read it again, and again, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something kinder. It didn't. There, in black and white, was a declaration that someone I had trusted, someone I had welcomed into my life, had been quietly securing a claim on my future. The signatures, the dates, her handwriting in places where a witness's mark made it personal. I remember the air leaving me. The room tilted. For a second, I could hear nothing but the tick of the clock on the wall, like a judge counting down. I held the policy and let the facts sink in. This was not a mistake. This was deliberate. My hands trembled, but not enough to drop the paper. Anger flared, hot and bright. It wanted to roar, to expose, to smash everything in sight. But I had learned that night that anger, untreated, is a blind thing. It makes you reckless. It plays into the hands of people who count on you losing control. So I did the opposite. I folded the paper carefully, put it back where I'd found it, and walked out as if nothing had happened. From that moment, my life became a quiet investigation. I began methodically collecting evidence like a woman assembling a map. I took photos of documents with my phone, careful not to let anyone see me. I saved text messages that seemed odd, archived emails that had disappeared, and copied bank statements that showed small transfers at suspicious times. I bought a small digital voice recorder and began keeping it in my bag, pretending it was a useless gadget when friends commented. In private, it became my safety net. Recording conversations felt like stepping over a line, but betrayal redraws borders. When trust collapses, you need proof to rebuild what remains. So I recorded the hush-hush chats in the hallway, the clipped laughter after I walked away, the tone in his voice when he answered a message. I learned to read pauses, how a breath before a sentence often meant something unsaid was being hidden. It wasn't easy. Every piece of evidence I gathered stung like salt in an open wound. I would listen to a file and feel my longing for the man I married alongside the betrayal. I would scroll through texts and see the casual cruelty, those small exclusions that feel so harmless until they are painted together as a picture. Love, I discovered, does not always protect you from being wronged. It sometimes blinds you until the truth is undeniable. I kept a journal, too. Not the poetic kind, but a ledger, dates, times, who said what, who was where. It was clinical and steady, a record that turned my suspicions into a timeline. There's something empowering about turning chaos into columns on a page. Suddenly the confusion had order. The pattern became a plan. There were moments of heartbreak that hit deeper than I expected. I found receipts for dinners I hadn't attended. I found hotel bookings in places I had never been privy to. I found messages that used pet names I'd never heard, soft words offered in private. Each discovery was a small fracture, and as they multiplied, the smile I had practiced for years began to feel like a mask I no longer wanted to wear. Still, every victory in my research was quiet and contained. I wasn't broadcasting my pain to friends or family. I didn't fling accusations to the table and demand answers. That would have been satisfying, maybe, for a moment, but it would have given them the chance to shape the narrative. I needed the advantage that truth gives, not the theatrics of a confrontation, and so I kept my voice low and my eyes open. Sometimes the work was almost mundane, matching handwriting, checking dates, confirming who had been where. Sometimes it felt like spying on a stranger whose life was oddly connected to mine. Yet every fact I secured tightened my resolve. I could feel the slow building of strategy, the way a chess player positions pieces until checkmate becomes possible. There were also moments of doubt. I would catch myself remembering the early days, the laughter, the whispered promises, the quiet mornings in bed. I would wonder if I was destroying something salvageable, but then I would open my ledger and read the facts, one by one, until pity had no purchase. My husband's face grew more closed as my focus sharpened. He noticed my lessened warmth, my distance. He asked if I was okay. I said yes. He asked if I trusted him. I said yes. I lied gently, because I had learned that protection sometimes requires deception too. He grew suspicious, and in his suspicion he made mistakes. He left his messages open on the coffee table once. He forgot to delete a call log. Each slip was a gift. I also watched my mother-in-law with a new kind of attention. Her confidence was a shield, but under that shield I found clever cogs, someone who knew how to manipulate appearances. Her kindnesses were often performative, timed to when others would observe. She had friends who praised her generosity, neighbors who spoke of her lovely manners. Yet in private, she orchestrated things like a conductor in an empty theater. It hurt to see the woman who had once smiled at me as if I were family now standing across from me like an adversary. But I could not afford the luxury of shock or sorrow for long. The ledger, the recordings, the emails, they were building a case. Revelation would be sharper if it were built on fact, not feeling. When I closed my notebook at night, I felt tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. My bones felt heavy with decision, but beneath that exhaustion was a steady core of something I had not expected. A fierce, quiet clarity. The pain of discovery had sharpened me. The betrayal had not made me smaller. It had forced me to become smarter. There is a peculiar courage in choosing a careful path. It is the courage to wait, to gather, to prepare. It is the courage to believe that the right moment, executed correctly, can change everything. And so I waited, kept collecting, and planned in the space between breaths, because I knew, with the cold certainty of someone who had seen the evidence, that the moment would come when I would need to move. When it did, I would move not from a place of blind fury, but from a place of undeniable truth. There comes a moment in every betrayal when silence becomes heavier than words. For weeks I had waited, gathered, observed, but that night the silence became unbearable, a storm pressing against my chest. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The truth was ready to be spoken, and I was ready to see their faces when it shattered their illusion. It started quietly. Dinner was simple, the kind of meal that pretends everything is normal. He was scrolling through his phone, pretending to work. She was stirring her tea, pretending not to notice the tension. I sat across from them, smiling faintly, as if I were still the woman they thought they could deceive. When the moment felt right, I spoke softly. I know. 2 words. That's all it took. My husband froze mid-motion, his spoon clinking against the glass. He looked up, his eyes searching my face, confused, then wary. I didn't move. I wanted him to sit in that silence, to feel the weight of it. He tried to play innocent. Know what? He asked, voice too calm. But calmness can't mask panic, not when it's already creeping through the eyes. Everything, I said. The air between us thickened. For a heartbeat, he looked at me like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. And then, there it was, that flicker of fear. Small but unmistakable. The kind of fear only the guilty know. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You should really learn to hide your expressions better, I whispered. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to lie again, but I stopped him. I placed a small folder on the table, my quiet masterpiece. Inside it, copies of the insurance policy, transcripts of messages, photos, records. Every secret he thought was buried now lay exposed under the dining room light. The color drained from his face. I loved you, I said, voice shaking just enough to make it human, and while I was fighting to protect what we built, you were signing away my life behind my back. He tried denial first, as expected. They always do. He called it a misunderstanding, said it was her idea, said I was reading too much into things. But the words were empty. I watched him twist in his own web, every excuse weaker than the last, and then I said her name. Your mother. His body stiffened. That told me more than any confession could. She planned it, didn't she? I continued. The policy, the dinners, the distance, every little thing. He said nothing, and in that silence I found my confirmation. A slow, bitter smile spread across my face. You thought I wouldn't find out, I said. You thought I was too soft, too trusting. He tried to reach for me then, out of guilt, out of fear. I'll never know. But I pulled back. His touch felt foreign now, like a stranger's hand. That's when she appeared. My mother-in-law, calm, composed, her voice dripping with false concern. What's going on here? She asked, as though she didn't already know. I turned to her slowly. You tell me. Her mask didn't slip easily. Years of manipulation had made her an expert at performance. She smiled, that same perfect patronizing smile, and said, Sweetheart, you're overreacting. You've misunderstood everything, but I had come prepared for her too. I played the recording, her voice, clear as glass, whispering in the background of a call I had captured. Once it's done, she won't even know what hit her. Her expression faltered. For the first time, the Queen lost her composure. The room was silent except for her shallow breath and my husband's disbelief. He looked at her, then at me, like a man realizing the extent of his own ruin. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Not yet. Because betrayal isn't just a single act. It's a series of small deaths. Trust, love, loyalty, all fading one by one until you're left with nothing but clarity. I realized in that moment that revenge wasn't just a desire anymore. It was survival. It was the only way to reclaim my power, my dignity, my peace. They had plotted behind my back, used my kindness as a weakness. Now, I would use their arrogance as my weapon. I stood up slowly, gathering my folder. You've both made your choices, I said quietly. Now it's my turn. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. The silence said enough. Fear, guilt, shock, all tangled together. I walked away that night, not as a victim, but as a woman who finally understood the game, and who was ready to play it better than the ones who started it. After the confrontation, I could have screamed. I could have walked into every room and told the whole world what they had done, but that would have been theater. Loud, messy, and easy to dismiss as the outburst of a hurt woman. I wanted more than a scene. I wanted true, irreversible change. So I planned, not with fury but with patience, not with shouts but with quiet surgical moves. Revenge, I decided, would be a careful thing, precise, indisputable, and final. I spent weeks building a strategy the way an architect draws detailed blueprints. Each line mattered. Every measurement had to be exact. First, evidence. I doubled down on what I already had. I organized the documents, transcribed the recordings, and built a timeline so clean it could be shown to a judge. Small details that might have seemed minor on their own became lethal when connected. Dates, transfers, the exact wording of messages. I printed copies, encrypted files on my laptop, and made backups hidden in places they would never think to look. I tracked financial movements with the same care. Where had the small transfers gone? Which card was used for dinners they said were family meetings? I followed paper trails until each signature led to another fact. Numbers don't lie the way people do. They revealed patterns. Payments timed to cover meetings, reimbursements that made no sense, and an insurance policy that fit neatly into the picture I was assembling. I mapped social patterns too. I watched who called whom, who visited when, the convenient business trips that matched up with their secret messages. I noted the evenings when my husband was suddenly unavailable and cataloged them against her so-called helpful visits. Every coincidence became a piece of the puzzle. Then I turned to psychology. Evidence alone would expose them, but I wanted the collapse to feel inevitable, not like a sudden strike. I wanted their alliance to fracture from the inside, so I became a subtle hand at work behind the curtain. I planted doubts, not obvious accusations. Those would have made me transparent. Instead, I used suggestion and silence. I let small things happen that looked like accidents. A message meant for someone else that I happened to see. A printed photo of my husband at a cafe that I found and placed where his mother would notice. I left receipts in visible spots. I commented, casually and in front of others, about how funny it was that so many work dinners happened on the same nights. My words were small, almost throwaway, but they were seeds. People water small seeds with conversations. They defend themselves. They explain. And when two guilty people start explaining, cracks appear. I fed those cracks. I sent anonymous notes that contained truthful half-statements. Things like, "You left your phone open again." Or, "Funny how someone always knows where he is." They were harmless on paper, but inside, they were corrosive. They made my husband and my mother-in-law look at each other with suspicion. In private, I played a quiet game of mirrors. I recreated situations that would force their reactions, and then sat back to watch. I invited them both to family dinners separately, always smiling, always composed, and watched how their eyes shifted when the other was mentioned. I asked neutral questions about schedules, plans, the estate, and let their answers contradict the records I had kept. Each contradiction I let hang like a loose thread until it pulled at the rest of their seam, and I used the people around them. Allies are invaluable in a plan like this because they give you distance. I fed small truths to friends and cousins who were already slightly skeptical. I let them see what I wanted them to see. The odd messages, the late nights, the awkward explanations. Human gossip is a rough instrument, but it can be a precise one if you know where to strike. It created pressure in places I couldn't reach directly. Every move was designed to look like coincidence. Real life is messy. I relied on that messiness to hide the intent. That way, when things unraveled, no one could accuse me of manufacturing a spectacle. They would see only the weight of truth tipping the balance. I also planned for the emotional side of things. I prepared my own performances so I wouldn't be easy to read. When I needed to seem hurt, I allowed my voice to tremble. When I needed to be strong, I practiced stillness until my face could hold calm like stone. A carefully timed smile, a well-placed silence. These were my tools. You cannot underestimate how disarming composure can be to someone expecting drama. There were practical measures, too. I secured legal advice quietly, consulting a lawyer under the pretense of business matters. I locked down accounts, changed passwords, and made sure my assets were insulated from any sudden attempts to transfer them. Anticipate, I told myself. Prepare. Protect. I rehearsed the reveal in my head like a director rehearses a scene. What would I show first? The policy? The transfers? Or the recording, her voice saying what she had said? I wanted the sequence to be ruthlessly effective. The first blow would be undeniable. The second would make excuses impossible. Patience gave me another advantage. Arrogance is loud and careless. They had assumed I would react with tears or with a public outcry. They had not expected a methodical response. They had not expected me to make them doubt each other. They had not expected me to let their own paranoia become their undoing. Days turned into weeks. I moved like a shadow through my own life, doing errands, going to work, keeping friends, all while the invisible task of dismantling their plot continued. It was exhausting, and there were nights when I wanted to abandon the plan in favor of ease. But the thought of being manipulated, of having my future quietly stolen, kept me steady. Sometimes I would look at my reflection in the hallway mirror and not recognize the woman who stood back from family photos now. She was quieter, yes, but there was an edge in her eyes I hadn't seen before. It wasn't hatred. It was resolve. I had been softened by years of hoping and forgiving. Now I was sharpened by knowledge and purpose. And then, Unremarkable as the dawn, the first crack I had engineered widened. A text left open, a receipt that didn't match a story, a hushed conversation that left one of them slipping up. It was small, a pebble tossed into a pond, but the ripples were exactly as I had planned. They began to stammer in ways that made them look guilty. They started listening to each other with new wariness. Little fights appeared where there had been smooth collusion. Their once seamless partnership showed the first signs of strain. From the outside, people called it coincidence. From the inside, I knew it was momentum. The quiet work, the patient assembling of facts, and the slow erosion of their certainty was turning the tide. They had underestimated me entirely, blinded by arrogance and by the belief that I was a soft, unthreatening presence. They were wrong. I closed my notebook that night and felt the calm that follows an honest day of work. The pieces were where they needed to be. The documents, the recordings, the planted doubts. Everything aligned like a constellation waiting for the right night to be visible. The storm was coming. Not a sudden crash, but a calculated, precise strike. And when it hit, there would be no room for denials. Midnight. The hour when most people are asleep, when masks slip and truths rise to the surface. I chose that hour deliberately. Darkness has a way of amplifying everything. Tension, fear, silence. And that night, I wasn't just hosting dinner. I was staging the final act of a play they didn't even know they'd been cast in. The house glowed softly with warm lights. I had set the table beautifully, candles flickering like watchful eyes. Every detail was calculated to feel natural, inviting, almost tender, the perfect camouflage for the storm about to break. They arrived exactly on time. My husband walked in first, still in his office clothes, acting tired but trying to look casual. My mother-in-law followed, wearing her usual smile, polished, perfect, the same one she'd used for years to hide her games. "Everything looks wonderful," she said, scanning the room as if she owned it. I smiled, calm and poised. I wanted tonight to feel memorable. We ate slowly, laughter like echoes bouncing off the walls, but beneath it was a tension I could almost taste. They thought I had moved on from suspicion. They thought my silence meant surrender. They were wrong. The moment came between courses, the pause when glasses were refilled and plates cleared. I stood up, almost casually, and said, "There's something I've been working on." My voice was steady, almost soft. They looked up, curious, unaware. I reached for the small leather folder I'd placed on the sideboard. My fingers didn't shake as I opened it. Inside was the truth. Every document, every email, every record, carefully arranged like evidence in a courtroom. I placed it in front of them and stepped back. First, the insurance policy, their signatures, their dates. Then the bank transfers. Then the emails, printed and highlighted, each message a thread in their web of deception. And finally the recording, her voice, his silence, the planning, the whispers. At first, they didn't speak. The only sound was the faint tick of the clock on the wall. My husband's face drained of color, his lips parting as if words might come but finding none. He stared at the papers like they might vanish if he blinked hard enough. My mother-in-law's smile, that infamous, unbreakable smile, trembled. Her eyes darted from page to page, then to me, searching for a loophole, a weakness, an escape. But there was none. I had left no cracks. "You've been busy," she said finally, her voice tight, brittle. "Not busy," I corrected softly. "Prepared." My husband tried to speak then. "It's not what you think." I held up a hand. "Don't." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The facts were louder than any accusation. I watched them both as the realization settled over them like a slow, cold tide. Everything they'd built, the secret plan, the hidden deals, the manipulations, lay naked in the light. And they knew, as I knew, that it wasn't just evidence. It was the end of their power. "I gave you both my trust," I said, my tone measured but cutting. "And you treated it like a game. Tonight the game ends, silence. The most powerful sound of all, no yelling. No tears, no chaos. Just the truth. Heavy, undeniable, final." I slid a final envelope across the table. My terms. Legal financial personnel. Clear boundaries, signed and ready. They could try to fight, but the evidence would crush them. And they knew it. My husband dropped his gaze to the floor. My mother-in-law pressed her lips together, the fight draining out of her. "I'm not here to destroy you," I said quietly. "I'm here to take back what's mine." And with that, I stood, calm and unshaken. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I simply walked away. The sound of my heels soft against the floor, each step an ending and a beginning. That night, I didn't just take revenge. I reclaimed my dignity, my life, my future. The days after that night were quiet. Too quiet, almost. The kind of silence that follows an explosion, where everything is still standing, but nothing is the same. I didn't have to lift another finger. The truth I had unleashed did all the work for me. Words spread faster than I could have imagined. Whispers became questions, and questions became confrontations. My mother-in-law's carefully built reputation, her charm, her perfect family facade, began to crack in public. Relatives called. Friends visited. Everyone wanted to understand what happened, but the more they asked, the more her lies tangled themselves. Each denial sounded thinner, each explanation weaker, and every time she tried to blame me, someone else stepped in with a fact she couldn't erase. Her empire of control, the subtle manipulations, the backhanded remarks, the quiet dominance over family decisions, collapsed under its own weight. I watched, silently. I didn't argue. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. The evidence had already done that for me. My husband wasn't spared either. For years he had lived in her shadow, guided by her whispers. Now, with everything exposed, he had to face the one thing he feared most: himself. He came to me once, eyes hollow, voice trembling. "I made a mistake," he said. "No," I replied softly. "You made a choice." He didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Friends who once envied our perfect marriage now looked at him with pity, some with disgust. The truth has a way of changing how people see you, permanently. Their alliance, mother and son, conspirators in shadows, began to crumble publicly. I heard about their arguments through others. The same control she once used on me, she now turned on him. And the same blind loyalty he once gave her, he now resented. I didn't need to gloat. Watching them unravel was not about satisfaction. It was about understanding, about seeing that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. The power wasn't in my voice anymore. It was in my silence, in my composure, in the proof that stood unshaken even when they tried to twist it. At family gatherings, people looked at me differently now, not with sympathy, but with respect. The woman they thought was fragile had become someone untouchable, not because I had destroyed anyone, but because I had survived, and done so with grace. My mother-in-law stopped coming around after a while. Her presence faded like perfume after a storm, lingering but powerless. My husband moved out, saying he needed space, though I think what he really needed was forgiveness, something I had long stopped offering. And in that silence, as their world fell apart, I finally breathed again, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with peace, because I realized something. Revenge wasn't the end of the story. It was just the bridge that carried me back to myself. Healing didn't come from watching them suffer. It came from standing tall again, from knowing I had faced deceit, endured it, and turned it into strength. The fall I witnessed wasn't just theirs. It was the collapse of every illusion I had once lived under. The illusion of love without honesty, of family without loyalty, of peace without truth. When I walked past the mirror one morning, I caught my reflection, calm, steady, free. For the first time in years, I recognized the woman staring back, and she wasn't broken anymore. Life didn't go back to how it was before. It never could. But maybe it wasn't supposed to. What followed wasn't chaos. It was clarity. The kind that only comes after you've walked through fire and learned you can survive the burn. I didn't rebuild my marriage. I rebuilt myself. Piece by piece, day by day, I stitched together the parts of me they had tried to tear apart. My confidence, my peace, my laughter. I stopped living for validation, for appearances, for anyone else's comfort. I started living for me. The house felt different now. Quieter, but not empty. Peaceful. I filled it with new routines, new memories, new energy. The ghosts of betrayal still lingered in some corners, but I refused to feed them anymore. I cut ties with those who thrived on gossip and manipulation. I stopped explaining my choices to people who had never lived my pain. And for the first time in years, I surrounded myself only with truth. Real friends, genuine smiles, honest love. The night of betrayal had once broken me. Now I saw it for what it truly was, a turning point. It taught me the power of intuition, the weight of silence, and the value of walking away when staying costs your soul. I learned that forgiveness isn't about letting others off the hook. It's about setting yourself free. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting it hurt anymore. Some scars still remain. Faint but visible. I see them every now and then. Not as marks of weakness, but as proof that I survived. They remind me that I can bend without breaking. That I can lose everything and still find my way back. Because in the end, I wasn't the victim of their betrayal. I was the survivor of my own awakening. And that is the most powerful revenge of all. Revenge. It's a dangerous word. Sharp, tempting, addictive. It can destroy, or it can define. But I learned that night, revenge isn't always about making someone suffer. It's about restoring balance. It's about standing tall when they expect you to crumble, speaking truth when they've built a kingdom of lies, and walking away stronger than they ever imagined. When my world shattered at midnight, I thought I was losing everything. In truth, I was being reborn. The lesson wasn't hidden in their downfall. It was hidden in my own transformation. Because the greatest power you can ever hold is control over yourself, your calm, your choices, your silence. Betrayal will come in many forms, through words, through actions, through the ones you trusted most. But it's not the betrayal that defines you. It's how you respond to it. Let them lie. Let them plot. Let them underestimate you. Because when the time is right, your truth, your strength, your patience will speak louder than any revenge ever could. That night taught me this. You don't always need to fight loudly to win. Sometimes, the quietest revenge is rebuilding yourself into someone they can no longer touch. So if you ever find yourself broken at midnight, remember, the darkness doesn't last forever. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of your dawn.